Okay, so it's raining a lot. I'm with my good friend Wright, who has been a licensed clinical social worker for over 20 years. I'm going to ask him questions about Gen Z, their mental health, financial struggles, and loneliness. Could you shine some light on men who struggle with their masculinity? Because I know there's a lot of messaging about toxic masculinity. What is healthy masculinity?
Let me suggest that there is no such thing as toxic masculinity. There's just masculinity. And however you feel, if you identify as masculine, whatever you feel, that is your masculinity. Mm-hmm. And I think it's about being comfortable with who you are in wherever you are. Gender exists on a continuum, right? I think what's toxic masculinity is when people are not accepting of their own sense of self.
Okay.
That's what really contributes to what this term that has gone around, the toxic masculinity. And I think it's an unfortunate term to use because it's become a source of shame for people. And I think that's part of why young men have a hard time identifying their own masculinity, because there's this fear that, oh, I'm being toxic.
I see.
And you're not being toxic. You might not be appropriate, and you may need to think about your behavior and how you relate to other people, how you relate to men. Do you have an authentic relationship with other men and with women? If you don't have an authentic relationship, that's something for you to think about, but don't think about it as being toxic. Toxic is, to say that I'm being toxic, is a way for me to shame myself.
Yeah.
What I might need to acknowledge is that's not appropriate. I shouldn't act that way. I shouldn't say those words. And if I hear somebody using, words that are shaming to other men's sense of masculinity, I should be stepping in and saying, hey, that's not appropriate. That's just how that person is.
Gotcha.
They're not like you. That doesn't mean that they're not masculine.
So it's okay to feel secure in your own right that you are being man enough, and there is no perfect image of what a man should be.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's about your perfect image is you, as you are. That's absolutely the message. And when you come up and you need to have, and this is part of, I think, what's difficult too, and I want to be sensitive here to single moms who work really hard to try to raise their sons and daughters and to be both the mother and father. It's hard to do. Yeah. And I think what young men also need to be able to do is to identify and maybe even ask their mom's help, to identify, who is a good role model for me.
Yeah.
And to not be afraid to say, that's who I want to be more like.
So to find mentors or teachers in your immediate environment.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. Not settle for, who everyone is identifying as their mentor, but who do you identify? Who is someone that you really want to be like?
Yeah.
And don't pick Tom Brady or, don't pick a sports personality to be your mentor for masculinity. Pick somebody who is authentic, who you know in an authentic way.
Okay.
And they knew you in an authentic way.
So being honest with yourself, who you want to be, and it's okay to be that person.
Yeah.
Versus sticking to a stigma or whatever it's popular at the time.
Yeah. And nothing against Tom Brady.
Yeah.
Great football player, but I have no idea what kind of person he is. Do I want to be like him? I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe not. I'll make that his money.
Yeah. That's great. So my last and final question is, how has dating evolved, and is Gen Z fucked when it comes to terms of trying to find a suitable partner?
So a lot of challenges coming out of COVID, no question about it. Gen Z is not fucked.
Okay.
That's the good news.
That's good news, okay.
But I'll tell you, every generation feels, I felt like I was fucked.
Yeah.
I was a shy kid. It was hard for me to go up and talk to girls. Again, it's sort of like you have to know that you're good enough. Mm-hmm. You got to be able to say that to yourself. And if you don't feel comfortable saying that to yourself, say it to yourself anyway.
Yeah.
Try to internalize that and look for strengths and successes, and you got to take a risk.
Yeah.
It's hard, and I had to take a risk. Every generation has to learn to take a risk.
Yeah.
And I think it's a unique risk that Gen Z has had to take because, again, coming up 10, 12, 13 years old, and not going out to party on a Friday night at a friend's house where there was going to be, young men and young women.
Yeah.
It's hard to have not had those skills,
Yeah.
but you can do it.
Yeah.
It's just going up and talking to people.
Yeah. So it's always been uncomfortable, like taking that risk, approaching someone.
Yes.
It's kind of like a rite of passage for men of being in your own head and sometimes failing. Like you fail a lot more than you succeed.
You do. And you know what? I will always remember the failures as like pain points in my past. I don't want to say like those stand out over the successes because they don't.
Yeah.
In certain moments, they will probably feel like they stand out more.
Yeah.
Because they may be more recent.
Yeah.
But those are not what's going to define your life. You have to define your life by your successes, and you've got to create successes by taking chances.
Yeah.
And define successes in small amounts. A success is not meeting your life partner and happily ever after. And guess what? It's not just happily ever after because relationships take work. Success is like one small little thing on top of another. Going up and just having a nice, calm conversation with a woman, that's a success unto itself.
Okay.
Build on that.
Yeah.
Build on that.
So it's more or less like the conclusion would be to get out of your own head, to build a social network, to build social skills, to go to in-person events, putting it all on the line, taking that risk to introduce yourself to someone you find attractive.
Yeah, someone you find attractive.
Failing.
Yep.
It's getting off your phone and getting away from, would you say, like online dating as a whole, or just focus on in real life interaction?
I think if online dating works for you, great. I don't think it works for the majority of people. There's some clients that I have who are like, yeah, I have no problem. I can get a date anytime I want. I just go online, swipe. I get a date on Friday. And I'm like, what? And, I just think there's something about how people can portray themselves online.
Yeah.
The other side of that is that doesn't mean they're getting a second date.
That is true. That is true. Yeah.
And that's sort of the point, is really, it's not the number of first dates.
Yeah.
That count. It's the quality of the first date that you get. And so knowing that, just because you don't have something to do on a Friday night doesn't mean that you aren't going to find your partner. Find someone to be able to spend time with and just be friends. And I think that's the other thing that I think even in my generation, we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to like, okay, did you get to first base? Did you get to kiss her? Did you get to kiss them? And I mean, I grew up in a very heteronormative world, so, I should apologize in advance. I probably am coming off a little heteronormative, but just finding somebody, and I think what is probably a helpful thing to think about is building on a friendship.
Yeah.
I'll say, the person that I'm with right now, who I'm very happy with, we were friends very deliberately for a long time, and it's great, and I'll tell you, the people that I know that have been the happiest have said they married their best friend.
Okay.
So don't shy away from that notion of being able to be friends first.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
And then a lot of people in Gen Z kind of feel nihilistic and hopeless in today's society with everything going on, especially in dating, career-wise, and just failing to launch out of it. So these are normal feelings, you'd say, when you're in your early 20s.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's hard, it's really hard to break away from your parents. And, rent's expensive, houses are expensive to buy. I'll tell you, and it's true, there are, some realities that change from generation to generation. I remember my dad one point saying to me, like, I don't understand how people are going to be able to afford a house the way that, me and your mother did. But there are ways to do it because people are doing it. And it probably was going to require people to be more creative about, maybe about, I don't want to say like a second job, but a second way to make money, to be creative in small investments when you're young. I remember now, and I think a lot of people my age who rented in their 20s are like, God, I wish I'd bought that house. I wish I had just stretched myself. I remember there was a house that I had like cheap rent, you know, and I look back at that house and I remember when it sold, we had to move out, and I'm like, God, I should have just done anything I could to buy that house.
Yeah.
Because now it's like, you know, going up so much in price. The reality is everything is going to go up in price. Don't be afraid to like take a chance.
Yeah.
You know, buy a house early in life. You know, that's a great way to build wealth later in life, is to have an investment, you know, that you can look back on. And yeah, know that every generation that's come before you has had their own unique challenges, just like Gen Z. There are ways to overcome it.
Yeah.
And you've got to know that the world has struggled in the past, and has succeeded past those struggles. There have been ways that we have figured a way through the problems of the world, and it is going to get better.
Yeah.
Absolutely, everything is going to get better.
Perfect. Well, once again, guys, thank you to Wright for shining his light and sharing his thoughts on this. I know a lot of you guys requested this, and you can find him at his website if you want to chime that in.
Turnthepage.life, or you can find me on Psychology Today.
Perfect.